"I'm done with you," the Millionaire CEO screamed. But, after 3 years apart, seeing her again broke him to his knees. "Hi, my beautiful and loyal family. Welcome back to your own family channel, Mr. Peter Family. May the Almighty clothe every woman in unshakable courage, quiet miracles, and a peace that cannot be stolen. May every long night turn into dawn, every burden into breakthrough, and every hidden ache into a testimony of strength. You are the warmth in cold seasons, the voice that steadies the trembling, and the heartbeat that keeps families whole. May your path shine with hope, may your spirit stay unbroken, and may your smile return brighter after every storm. My precious family, don't fall silent tonight. Your presence is the heartbeat of this home. A like is a touch of faith, a comment is a flame of unity. This is Mission 1000 likes. For every woman who endures, who believes, who rises again. If your heart still carries love, like this video. If your soul walks with faith, comment, "I'm with Mr. Peter. I'm sick of you." The words tore from Ben Foster's throat like shrapnel, each syllable designed to wound. The charity gala fell silent around them. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, casting fractured light across faces turned toward the spectacle. Deandra Dotton stood frozen in her emerald dress, the one Ben had insisted she wear, the one he'd said made her beautiful. Now his face twisted with disgust as he stared at her like she was something rotten. "Meeting with Gerald Henderson? Taking payoffs from my competitors?" Ben's voice carried across the marble ballroom, bouncing off gilded walls. "Did you think I was too stupid to find out? Did you think I'd never discover what you really are?" Deandra's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, where a 2-month secret grew, twins the doctor had confirmed yesterday. She'd planned to tell him tonight after dinner in the quiet of their bedroom, where she could watch joy transform his face. That would never happen now. "Ben, please listen to me." Her voice stayed steady, despite the trembling in her legs. "I never took anything from anyone. Gerald approached me at a coffee shop and offered me money to convince you to sell your shares. I refused immediately and told him I would never betray you. I was going to tell you about it after your board presentation because I didn't want to add stress when you were already dealing with so much." Convenient excuse. Ben laughed, harsh and unfamiliar. This wasn't her Ben, the man who brought her coffee in bed, who rubbed her feet after long days, who whispered poetry against her skin in darkness. This was a stranger wearing his face. "You didn't want to add stress? You are the stress, Deandra. Every board meeting they question why I'm with someone from your background. My investors whisper about gold diggers. My mother has to constantly defend me." Background. The word hung between them, loaded with implications he'd never voiced before. Something cracked inside Deandra's chest, something that had been holding her together. "Say what you really mean, Ben." Her voice went quiet, deadly calm. "Say what your mother has been whispering in your ear for months. Say it out loud so everyone can hear the truth." Ben's jaw clenched. Something flickered across his face that might have been shame, but Patricia Foster moved closer, her hand touching his arm, and whatever hesitation existed, vanished. "You're not who I thought you were," he said finally. "I need you gone. Out of my house, out of my life. I'll have your things sent wherever you want them, but I can't look at you anymore without feeling sick." The guests murmured now, some moving away to give privacy, others leaning in to catch every word. Deandra saw her reflection in the massive mirror behind Ben, saw a woman in a beautiful dress with mascara streaking down her cheeks, saw the death of everything she'd believed in. She thought about telling him right then about the babies growing inside her, thought about using them as weapons to make him listen, to force him to see reason. But looking at his face, at the disgust and certainty written there, she knew it wouldn't matter. He'd made his choice. His mother had won this war before Deandra even knew they were fighting. "I loved you," Deandra said softly, words meant only for him despite their audience. "I loved you more than I've ever loved anything. I would have given my life for you, but you're right about one thing. You are sick. sick with whatever poison she's been feeding you, sick with mistrust, sick with cruelty. And I am sick of trying to prove myself to someone who will always believe the worst of me. She pulled the engagement ring from her finger, the princess-cut diamond he'd presented on a beach at sunrise when the world seemed full of endless possibility. She set it on the nearest table with a soft click that sounded like a door closing forever. Goodbye, Ben Foster. I hope whatever you find to replace me fills the holes better than I could. Deandra walked through the silent crowd with her head high, spine straight, everything inside her screaming and dying. She didn't look back. If she looked back, she would crumble, and she refused to give Patricia Foster that satisfaction. Behind her, she heard his mother's voice, syrupy with false sympathy. You're better off, darling. She was never right for our family. Now you can find someone appropriate, someone who understands your world. Deandra pushed through the ballroom doors into cool night air and finally let herself break. Her legs gave out and she sank onto a stone bench, great heaving sobs tearing from her chest. 3 years of love, destroyed in minutes. 3 years of building a life together, demolished by lies she couldn't defend against because he refused to listen. She pressed both hands to her stomach, to the lives growing there who would never know their father. I'm sorry, she whispered to them. I'm sorry I chose someone so weak. But I promise you this. I will give you everything. You will never doubt my love. You will never feel unwanted or unworthy. You will know what it means to be chosen every single day of your lives because I choose you. I will always choose you. A taxi pulled up at her signal. Deandra gave the driver her address and stared out the window as the glittering gala faded behind her. She'd go to the penthouse, pack only essentials while Ben celebrated his narrow escape. Then she'd disappear into a life he would never touch again. Hours later, she sat in a bus station that smelled of disinfectant and desperation, her small suitcase at her feet. The bus to Chicago idled outside, its engine rumbling like a heartbeat. Deandra had chosen Chicago because it was big enough to disappear in, far enough that coincidental meetings would be unlikely, affordable enough that she could survive while pregnant and then raising children alone. She had $3,000 in savings, enough for first and last month's rent, and maybe a month of groceries. After that, she'd have to find work, build a career from nothing, create a life that didn't depend on anyone's approval or love or support. The challenge felt insurmountable, but the alternative was staying within reach of Ben Foster and Patricia Foster and their poisonous world. The bus driver called for boarding. Deandra picked up her suitcase and walked toward the vehicle that would carry her toward an uncertain future. As she climbed the steps, she touched her stomach one more time. We're going to be okay, she promised her unborn children. Your mama is going to make sure of that. The bus doors closed with a hydraulic hiss. Through the window she watched the station fade away, watched the city where she'd loved and lost disappear into darkness. Somewhere in that darkness, Ben Foster was probably already forgetting her, probably already letting his mother find him someone suitable, probably already convincing himself he'd dodged a bullet. He would never know what he'd lost tonight. He would never know about the children who would grow up without him. He would never know that Deandra Dottin's love, once destroyed, could never be resurrected. The bus rolled onto the highway, carrying her toward Chicago, toward survival, toward a life built on the ashes of everything she'd believed in. Deandra closed her eyes and let the tears fall freely now that no one was watching. Tomorrow she would be strong. Tomorrow she would start building. But tonight she could grieve for the family that would never exist and the man who'd chosen his mother's poison over her truth. Chapter 2. Separate survival. 3 years had carved Ben Foster into something sharp and hollow. He stood at floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, whiskey in hand, watching evening lights blink on across the skyline. His company had exploded since that night. The hostile takeover had been defeated spectacularly. Stock value had tripled. Every business magazine featured him on covers, calling him genius, visionary, the future of American enterprise. He'd acquired 12 companies, expanded into international markets, built an empire that made his father's legacy look like a lemonade stand. None of it filled the emptiness inside him. Success tasted like ash. Victory felt like defeat. Every accomplishment rang hollow because the one person he'd wanted to share them with was gone, and he'd driven her away with his own hands. "Ben, darling, I've arranged dinner with the Carmichael family tonight." Patricia Foster entered the living room, heels clicking on marble. She'd moved into the penthouse 6 months after Deandra left, claiming she wanted to support him through his difficult time. She'd never left, gradually taking over his life again, managing his social calendar, vetting every woman who approached him. Their daughter Stephanie just returned from studying abroad. Lovely girl, very accomplished. Her family owns half the pharmaceutical industry. Ben didn't turn from the window. "Cancel it. You can't keep wallowing in this melancholy. It's been 3 years. That woman is gone, and thank goodness for that. You need to move forward, build a proper family with someone suitable." Patricia moved closer, her reflection appearing in glass beside his. "She was never going to give you the life you deserved." Ben's hand tightened around his glass. The impulse to throw it, to watch it shatter against pristine walls, surged through him. But he'd learned to keep everything locked down tight, to show nothing, to feel nothing. Feeling led to remembering, and remembering led to the photograph hidden in his nightstand drawer. "I said cancel it." Patricia's mouth pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "You're impossible when you're like this." "Fine. Eat alone again, drink yourself into another stupor. But don't come crying to me when you wake up at 40 and realize you've wasted your best years mourning someone who was using you." She left in a cloud of expensive perfume and judgment. Ben finally turned from the window and walked to his bedroom, to the drawer that held contraband. The photograph showed Deandra at the beach, laughing, hair wild in wind, eyes bright with joy and trust he'd destroyed. He'd taken this the day after proposing. She'd looked at him like he hung the moon, like he was everything good in the world. He put the photo back and locked the drawer, then locked his heart. Preparing for another day of pretending success satisfied him. Meanwhile, across the country in Chicago, Deandra Dottin was learning that survival required becoming someone entirely new. The apartment was small but clean, filled with toys and crayon drawings, and the beautiful chaos of 3-year-old twins. Harry and Rosie were hurricane forces contained in tiny bodies, with Ben's dark eyes and Deandra's warm skin, with questions that never stopped and energy that exhausted her daily. "Mama, when is Daddy coming home?" Rosie asked from the floor, where she was building a block tower taller than herself. Deandra looked up from her laptop, where she'd been reviewing financial reports for a client. She worked as an independent consultant now, taking contracts she could complete from home while raising her children alone. Money was tight but sufficient. She'd learned to stretch every dollar, to find joy in simple things, to build a life from scraps of dignity and fierce determination. "Your daddy had to go away for work, baby, but he loves you very much." The lie tasted bitter, worn smooth from repetition. How did you explain to 3-year-olds that their father didn't know they existed? That their grandmother had poisoned him so thoroughly he'd thrown away everything without a second thought? "Does he look like me?" Harry asked, abandoning toy cars to climb into Deandra's lap. "Do I have his eyes?" "You do, baby. You have his eyes and his stubborn chin." Deandra kissed the top of his head, breathing in baby shampoo and innocence. She'd given them pieces of their father through stories, creating a narrative where he was a good man, who'd had to leave for important reasons, who loved them but couldn't visit. Better that than the truth, that he'd rejected their mother so viciously she'd fled rather than tell him about them. "Will he come visit us?" Rosie's voice held hope that broke Deandra's heart. "Someday, maybe. But right now we have each other, and that's enough. Right?" Both children nodded, but Deandra felt their disappointment like a physical weight. They saw other kids with fathers at the park, heard other children talk about daddies, felt the absence like a missing limb. After she'd put the twins to bed, after reading 3 stories and singing 2 songs and promising yes tomorrow they could have pancakes. Deandra sat alone in darkness and let herself feel the weight of it all. 3 years of single motherhood had carved her into someone unrecognizable. She'd lost the softness Ben had loved, the easy trust, the openness that made her vulnerable. She'd become efficient and hard and suspicious of kindness because kindness usually wanted something in return. She'd learned to fix broken toilets and change car oil and negotiate with landlords and do her own taxes and handle medical emergencies alone. She'd learned that love was a luxury and survival was an art form. She'd learned that the man who destroyed her didn't deserve space in her thoughts, yet he lived there anyway, a ghost she couldn't exorcise because his face stared at her from their children's eyes every single day. Sometimes late at night, she wondered if he ever regretted his words, wondered if Patricia had found him someone suitable with the right pedigree and connections, wondered if he was happy in his empire while she struggled to make rent. But mostly, she didn't let herself wonder. Wondering led to weakness, and weakness led to breaking, and she couldn't afford to break when 2 small humans depended on her for everything. Her phone buzzed with a reminder about next week's business conference. The Hospitality Industry Consortium was hosting a major event, and several clients had encouraged her to attend for networking opportunities. She'd been reluctant because conferences cost money and time away from the twins, but her neighbor had offered to watch them, and the potential for new contracts was too good to pass up. She needed to grow her business, to provide better for Harry and Rosie, to build security against the precariousness of freelance income. Deandra marked the conference in her calendar, unaware that fate was about to collide her carefully rebuilt life with the past she'd spent 3 years trying to forget. Unaware that Ben Foster had received an identical invitation, that his company's recent hotel acquisitions made his attendance mandatory. In his penthouse, Ben confirmed his attendance to the Chicago conference and poured another whiskey, looking at the locked drawer that held his ghost. Neither of them slept well that night, separated by distance and time and choices that couldn't be unmade, both moving toward a reunion that would shatter whatever fragile piece they'd managed to construct from ruins. The universe was pulling them back together, indifferent to whether they were ready for the collision. Chapter 3. The Collision. The hotel conference center smelled of expensive coffee and calculated ambition. Ben Foster moved through the networking session with practiced ease, shaking hands, discussing market trends, his mind only half engaged with conversations. These events had become performance art, playing the role of successful CEO while feeling hollow inside, saying correct words while meaning none of them. He'd mastered the performance so completely that no one noticed the emptiness behind his smile. The boutique hotel market is evolving faster than anyone predicted, someone said to his left, a supplier whose name Ben couldn't remember. Experiential travel is the future. Your acquisition of the Grandview properties was brilliant positioning. Ben nodded, offered something about consumer preferences and market research, then excused himself to refresh coffee he didn't want. He was moving toward the refreshment table when he saw her, and time fractured into before and after. Deandra stood across the crowded room, engaged in animated conversation with 2 other professionals. She wore a simple navy dress that skimmed her curves, her natural hair in locks that fell past her shoulders, and she looked more beautiful than memory had preserved, but beautiful in a different way. Harder somehow, like something precious that had survived fire and emerged as steel instead of gold. She laughed at something someone said, her hand gesturing expressively, and Ben felt 3 years collapse into nothing. All the carefully constructed walls around her memory crumbled instantly, leaving him standing in a conference room with his heart pounding like he'd run a marathon. Everything he'd buried, all the grief and regret and love he'd tried to kill, surged back with devastating force. Then she turned her head, scanning the room, and their eyes met across the distance. The laughter died on her face. Color drained from her cheeks. She went absolutely still, a deer caught in headlights, and Ben saw recognition followed immediately by something that looked like panic or maybe rage. He started moving toward her before conscious thought caught up with instinct. People parted around him, probably reading intensity on his face and deciding to stay clear. Deandra said something quick to her companions and turned, walking rapidly toward the hallway exit, her pace just short of running. "Deandra!" His voice carried above ambient noise. Heads turned. She walked faster, heels clicking urgently on tile. Ben caught up with her in the corridor outside the ballroom, his hand reaching for her arm. She yanked away from his touch like it burned, spinning to face him with eyes that held no warmth, no recognition of what they'd once meant to each other. "Don't touch me." Her voice was ice, absolute zero, colder than anything in nature. This wasn't the woman who used to curl into his side while watching movies, who used to trace patterns on his chest while they talked about futures. This woman looked at him like he was dangerous, like he was something to be avoided at all costs, like he was nothing. "Deandra, please, I just want to talk." Ben held up his hands in surrender, trying to appear non-threatening, even as his pulse raced. "It's been 3 years. Can we just talk for 5 minutes, please? We have nothing to discuss." She crossed her arms over her chest, defensive body language that spoke volumes. "You made yourself very clear at that gala. You were sick of me, remember? Sick of looking at me. Well, congratulations. You got exactly what you wanted. Now let me get back to my work. I was wrong." The words rushed out, desperate and raw. "I was so completely wrong about everything. My mother lied about you. She manipulated the entire situation. I found out later that she paid people to set you up, to make it look like you were meeting with Gerald deliberately. Deandra, I'm so sorry. I should have trusted you. I should have listened instead of believing lies." Something flickered across her face, might have been vindication or might have been pain, but it disappeared quickly, replaced by that impenetrable coldness that was somehow worse than hatred, because it suggested he didn't matter enough to hate. "You're right. You should have trusted me. You should have known me well enough to realize I would never betray you, but you didn't. When it came down to choosing between believing in me and believing your mother's poison, you chose her. You chose lies over truth, suspicion over trust, convenience over love." She stepped closer, voice dropping to a whisper that hurt more than shouting. "Do you know what it's like to love someone who thinks so little of you? To give everything to someone who throws it away based on manufactured evidence? You destroyed me that night, Ben. You didn't just break my heart. You killed something essential in me, something trusting and hopeful and good. And I will never forgive you for that." "I know." Ben felt tears burning behind his eyes but refused to let them fall. "I know I destroyed us. I think about that night every single day. I see your face, hear your voice, remember the way you looked at me before you walked away. It haunts me. You haunt me. I haven't been able to move on because part of me died when you left." "Good." Deandra's smile was bitter, savage. "I hope it hurts. I hope you feel even a fraction of what you put me through. But this conversation is over. I've moved on. I built a new life without you, a better life, and I don't need your apologies or your guilt or your regret. I need you to stay away from me and let me do my job." She turned to walk away. Ben grabbed for her arm again, not roughly but firmly, needing her to hear him. She spun back with fury blazing in her eyes, hot enough to burn. "I said don't touch me. Touch me again, and I will have security remove you from this conference. I will file a complaint with the organizers. I will make your life professionally difficult in every way I can manage. Are we absolutely clear?" Ben released her immediately, shocked by the venom in her voice. This wasn't just anger. This was something deeper, something protective and fierce that he didn't understand. She seemed almost afraid of him, or afraid of something, and that confusion joined his grief. "Crystal clear," he said quietly. Deandra smoothed her dress, composed herself with visible effort, then walked away without looking back. Ben watched her disappear into the ballroom, watched the door close behind her, and felt something inside him break open that he'd been keeping carefully sealed for 3 years. She'd moved on. She'd built a better life. She didn't need him. The truth of it settled into his bones like winter cold, permanent and numbing. He'd spent 3 years telling himself that someday he'd find her, apologize, make things right. He'd fantasized about grand gestures and tearful reconciliations, about her falling into his arms and forgiving him and everything magically becoming perfect again. But reality was standing in a hotel hallway alone, realizing that some things, once broken, could never be repaired. Some betrayals were too profound for forgiveness. Some love, once killed, stayed dead, no matter how desperately you wished otherwise. Ben went back to his hotel room instead of returning to the conference. He sat on the bed's edge and stared at nothing, replaying every moment of their conversation, analyzing every word and gesture. The way she'd flinched from his touch like he was toxic. The way her eyes had gone dead when she looked at him, like he was nothing, less than nothing. The absolute certainty in her voice when she said she'd moved on and didn't need anything from him. He'd thought losing her 3 years ago was the worst pain possible. But this was worse. This was seeing her alive and thriving and completely beyond his reach, not because of distance or circumstance, but because he'd poisoned her love so thoroughly that not even its ghost remained. This was understanding that he'd destroyed something irreplaceable and would spend the rest of his life paying for that destruction. His phone rang. Patricia calling, probably wondering how the conference was going, probably ready with comments about networking opportunities. Ben sent it to voicemail and lay back on the bed staring at the ceiling, wondering how you survived when you'd destroyed the only thing that ever mattered. Chapter 4. The Unraveling. Ben Foster had built his empire on rational decision-making, on analyzing data and making choices based on facts rather than emotion. But rationality had abandoned him the moment he saw Deandra in that conference room, and now he was doing something completely irrational. He was following her. Not stalking, he told himself, just trying to understand her life, to see where she went, what she did, how she'd survived without him. The conference had 2 more days, and he'd spotted her twice more, always maintaining distance after their hostile hallway encounter. But this evening, when sessions ended, he watched her leave the hotel and followed at a careful distance as she walked 3 blocks to a small restaurant. She sat alone at a corner table, pulled out her laptop, and began working while eating a modest dinner. Ben watched from outside through the window, seeing the focus on her face, the way she'd occasionally paused to rub her temples like she was exhausted. He wanted to go inside, to sit across from her and tell her he'd spent 3 years missing her. But he'd promised to stay away, and breaking that promise would only prove he was still the selfish man who'd destroyed them. He was about to leave when Deandra's phone rang. She answered with a smile that transformed her entire face, warmth flooding features that had been hard and cold when speaking to him. "Hey, sweetie," she said, her voice soft with affection Ben hadn't heard in 3 years. "I know, baby, I know. Mama misses you too. Put your brother on the phone." Ben froze. Sweetie, baby, brother. The words registered but didn't make sense initially. Then they aligned into devastating possibility. Deandra had children. She'd moved on so completely that she'd built an entire family without him. He watched her face as she talked, saw love radiating from her expression, heard fragments of conversation through the window. "Harry, stop teasing your sister. I'll be home tomorrow morning. Be good for Miss Tammy. I love you both so much." She hung up and Ben saw her hand trembling slightly as she set the phone down. She pressed her fingers to her eyes and he realized she was crying, silent tears streaming down her cheeks while she sat alone in a restaurant 3 blocks from where he stood watching like a ghost. Something was wrong. This wasn't the picture of someone who'd moved on successfully. This was someone struggling, someone exhausted, someone carrying weight that was crushing her slowly. All his assumptions about her thriving without him crumbled as he watched her compose herself, wipe her tears, and return to her laptop like nothing had happened. Ben walked back to his hotel in a daze. She had children. The thought consumed him like fever. She'd found someone else, built a family, moved forward while he'd been frozen in the past. The jealousy that surged through him was irrational and unjustified. He had no right to feel anything about her life choices. He'd thrown her away. Someone else had been smart enough to value what he'd destroyed. But something didn't add up. The way she'd looked when talking to them, the exhaustion in her face, the tears after hanging up. That wasn't the expression of someone happily partnered. That was the face of someone alone and overwhelmed. Back in his room, Ben made a decision he knew was wrong, but couldn't stop himself from making. He called a private investigator, someone discreet who'd done background checks for business acquisitions. He gave minimal information: Deandra's name, the city she lived in, a request for basic information about her current situation. "I just need to know if she's okay," Ben said during their conversation. "Not detailed surveillance, just general information about her life circumstances. I'm not trying to intrude, I just need to understand if she needs help." The investigator agreed, and Ben wired the retainer, then spent another sleepless night imagining scenarios. Maybe she was married with stepchildren. Maybe she was divorced and struggling with custody. Maybe the children were siblings she was raising after some family tragedy. His mind spun through possibilities, none of them quite fitting what he'd witnessed. The next morning, back at the conference, Ben couldn't stop looking for her. She was scheduled to speak on a panel about financial consulting, and he positioned himself in the back of the room to watch without being obvious. She was brilliant, confident and articulate, handling complex questions with ease, making the audience laugh with well-timed observations about industry trends. This was Deandra fully realized, the professional woman who'd built a career from nothing, who commanded respect in rooms full of people who probably had no idea what she'd overcome to be standing on that stage. Pride swelled in his chest alongside grief. She'd done this without him. She'd become this powerful, self-assured person while he'd been drowning in whiskey and regret and his mother's toxic approval. When the panel ended, Ben didn't try to approach her. He'd learned that lesson. But he watched her network, saw her exchange business cards, noticed the way she held herself with confidence that hadn't existed 3 years ago. Pain and survival had forged her into steel, and while he grieved for the soft warmth she'd lost, he had to admire the strength she'd gained. His phone buzzed with a message from the investigator. "Preliminary information available. Can we talk?" Ben stepped outside and called back immediately. "What did you find?" "Ms. Dottin lives modestly in a safe neighborhood, works as an independent financial consultant with several regular clients. No criminal record, no debts, no obvious problems." The investigator paused. "But there are some interesting patterns. Regular purchases at children's stores, pediatrician appointments. Her apartment building lists her as the only adult resident, but neighbors report seeing her with 2 young children regularly. Best estimate based on observed patterns. She's a single mother, raising kids alone." Ben's world tilted. Single mother. Alone. No partner in the picture. But how old were the children? The investigator mentioned young. But what did that mean? Toddlers? School age? How old do you estimate the children are? Hard to say without direct observation, but based on the types of stores she frequents and items she purchases, probably preschool age, maybe 3 or 4 years old. 3 or 4 years old. The number lodged in Ben's brain like a bullet. 3 years since Deandra had left him. 3 years since that night at the gala, when he'd destroyed everything. "I need you to find out more," Ben heard himself say. "But carefully. I don't want her to know she's being observed. Just confirm the children's ages, whether there's a father in the picture, anything that helps me understand her situation." The investigator agreed, and Ben ended the call, his heart pounding. He was crossing lines, invading privacy, doing things that were morally questionable at best. But he needed to know. If those children were 3 years old, if Deandra had been pregnant when he'd thrown her out, if he'd destroyed her while she was carrying his children, then everything he thought he knew about that night crumbled into dust. Ben spent the rest of the conference in a fog. He attended sessions without hearing speakers. He networked without remembering conversations, his entire being focused on waiting for more information, for confirmation or denial of the possibility growing in his mind like a tumor. On the final evening, he saw Deandra one last time. She was leaving early, pulling her rolling suitcase toward the exit, and something in her posture spoke of exhaustion deeper than physical tiredness. She looked like someone carrying impossible weight, and every instinct Ben possessed screamed at him to help her, to ease her burden, to fix whatever was breaking her. But he'd lost that right 3 years ago. He watched her disappear through the hotel doors, watched her climb into a taxi that would take her back to her life and her children and her carefully constructed world that didn't include him. His phone buzzed. The investigator again. Ben answered immediately. "I have confirmation. Ms. Dottin has 3-year-old twins, a boy and a girl. No father listed on any documentation I could access legally. She's been raising them alone since birth, based on medical records I obtained through appropriate channels. Mr. Foster, if you're the father, she's kept them from you for their entire lives." The world stopped. Twins, 3 years old. His children existed, and he'd never known. Deandra had been pregnant that night, carrying his babies while he'd publicly humiliated her and told her he was sick of her. She'd tried to tell him and he'd refused to listen, and then she'd disappeared rather than trust him with the knowledge. Ben sat down hard on a lobby chair, unable to breathe, unable to process the enormity of what he'd lost. He'd missed everything. First words, first steps, birthdays, every milestone that mattered. He'd had children in the world for 3 years and didn't know, and that ignorance was his own fault, built on the foundation of his mother's manipulation and his own willingness to believe the worst of the woman who'd loved him. He had to find them, had to see them, had to confirm with his own eyes that these children existed, that he was a father, that everything had just changed in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. Ben cancelled his return flight and rented a car, following the address the investigator had provided. He had no plan beyond seeing where they lived, beyond making this revelation real instead of just information on a phone screen. Tomorrow, his life would change forever. Tomorrow, he would confront Deandra about the children she'd hidden from him. Tomorrow, he would meet his son and daughter and try to comprehend what kind of man didn't know his own children existed. But tonight, driving through Chicago toward an address that held his entire world, Ben Foster finally understood the full price of the choice he'd made 3 years ago. He hadn't just lost Deandra. He'd lost his family, his children, 3 years he could never recover. And he had no one to blame but himself. Chapter 5. Shadows of Truth. The apartment building sat in a neighborhood that was safe, but clearly not affluent, surrounded by similar structures that spoke of working families and modest dreams. Ben sat in his rental car across the street, staring at the address the investigator had provided, trying to summon courage he didn't possess. What was he doing here? What right did he have to insert himself into their lives after missing 3 years? The questions circled his mind like vultures, but underneath them ran a deeper truth. Those were his children, and he needed to see them, even if just from a distance. Morning sun climbed higher. Ben watched residents leave for work, children heading to school with backpacks, normal life unfolding around him. Then, at 8:30, the building's main door opened, and Deandra emerged with 2 small children. Ben's breath caught. The twins held her hands, one on each side, small figures in bright jackets. Even from across the street, even without seeing their faces clearly, he could tell they looked like him. The boy had his build, his way of moving. The girl had something in her posture that reminded him of his sister as a child. They were his. Biology sang recognition even at this distance. Deandra walked them toward the playground attached to the building complex. Ben watched as she helped them onto swings, pushed them gently, her face transformed with love so pure it hurt to witness. This was the Deandra he remembered, all the warmth and joy he'd loved, but directed entirely at the children he'd never known existed. She laughed at something the boy said, kissed the girl's head when she asked for help with the slide. They were a family, complete without him. The realization was devastating. He'd imagined inserting himself into their lives, but watching this scene, he understood how profoundly he would be disrupting something beautiful and functional. They didn't need him. Deandra had built something perfect without his involvement, but they were his children. That truth overrode every rational thought. He had rights, didn't he? Legal rights, parental rights, the right to know his own son and daughter. The internal argument raged while he watched them play. After an hour, they went back inside. Ben sat in his car another 2 hours, paralyzed by indecision. Finally, he forced himself to move. He couldn't sit here forever. He had to confront Deandra, had to demand answers, had to understand why she'd kept this secret for 3 years. Ben drove back to his hotel and called his lawyer. Lawrence Brennan answered on the second ring. "I need legal advice about a situation." Ben explained everything: the gala, Deandra's disappearance, the discovery that she'd been pregnant, the twins he'd never known about. "What are my rights here? Can she just keep them from me indefinitely?" Lawrence was quiet for a long moment. "Legally, you're the biological father, which gives you certain rights, but she's established 3 years of sole custody. From a court's perspective, she's the primary parent who's provided stable care while you were absent. You'll need to prove paternity first, then petition for custody arrangement, but any judge will question why you didn't know about them for 3 years. Because she never told me. Can you prove that? Did she attempt to contact you about the pregnancy? Are there messages, emails, any documentation showing she tried to inform you and you refused to respond?" Lawrence's tone was professional but pointed. "Because if there's no evidence she tried, if it's just your word against hers, a judge might view this as you being willfully ignorant or her being justifiably protective." Ben thought about that night at the gala, about refusing to let Deandra speak, about his mother's constant interference. "She tried to tell me that night, but I wouldn't listen. I was too busy accusing her of betrayal." "That's not going to look good in court. You publicly humiliated her, refused to hear her defense, then she disappeared. A judge could easily conclude she fled because you were hostile and she feared for her safety or her children's well-being." Lawrence paused. "My advice? Don't go in with lawyers blazing. Try to work something out with her privately. Show good faith. Prove you're serious about being a father. If she's reasonable, you might avoid court entirely. And if she's not reasonable, then we prepare for a long, expensive custody battle that will hurt everyone involved, especially the children. But Ben, listen carefully. You're starting from a position of weakness here. 3 years of absence, no child support paid, no involvement in their lives. She can argue you're a stranger to them, that introducing you would be disruptive and potentially harmful. You'll need to tread very carefully." Ben ended the call feeling worse than before. He'd been thinking about his rights, but Lawrence was right. What about the children's rights? Their right to stability, to not have their world turned upside down by a stranger who happened to share their DNA. He spent the rest of the day researching parenting, child psychology, custody arrangements. Everything he read emphasized consistency, stability, gradual introduction of new people into children's lives. Everything suggested that bursting into their world and demanding immediate access would be harmful to them. By evening, Ben had made a decision. He would approach Deandra privately, explain what he'd discovered, ask for the chance to be introduced to his children gradually. He would offer financial support, medical coverage, whatever they needed. He would try to work with her rather than against her, for the twins' sake, if not for hers. But first, he needed to confront her about why she'd hidden them. He needed to understand her reasoning, even if he couldn't accept it. He needed to hear from her own mouth why she'd chosen to raise his children alone, rather than tell him they existed. Ben drove back to her neighborhood and waited until the evening. He'd seen her return home earlier with the twins after picking them up from what looked like a daycare. Now, as darkness fell, he approached the building and found her name on the buzzer. He pressed it before courage could fail. Her voice came through the speaker, cautious. "Who is it?" "It's Ben. I need to talk to you. Please, Deandra, it's important." Silence stretched so long, he thought she might refuse. Then the door buzzed open. He climbed stairs to the 3rd floor and found her waiting in her doorway, arms crossed defensively. She looked exhausted and wary, and something else he couldn't identify. Fear, maybe, or resignation. "How did you find my address?" she asked without preamble. "Does it matter? I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." Ben forced himself to meet her eyes. Do I have children? Are there twins 3 years old living in this apartment? Deandra's face went through several expressions: shock, anger, something that might have been relief. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. You'd better come inside. Ben entered her small apartment, seeing toys scattered across the living room, children's drawings on the refrigerator, 2 small jackets hanging by the door. Evidence of the family he'd missed. In the bedroom beyond, he could hear soft breathing, the twins sleeping peacefully, unaware that their entire world was about to change. Deandra closed the door and turned to face him, and in her eyes he saw 3 years of struggle and survival and love that he hadn't been part of. Yes, she said quietly. You have children, Harry and Rosie. They're yours. And before you ask why I never told you, before you start making accusations and demanding rights, I need you to remember something. I tried to tell you that night. I was 2 months pregnant when you destroyed me at that gala, when you called me sick and threw me out of your life, when you wouldn't listen to a single word I tried to say. So yes, I left. I disappeared. I built a life without you because I couldn't trust the man who believed I was capable of betrayal over the woman who'd loved him with everything she had. Ben stared at her, hearing the words, but struggling to process them. She'd tried. She'd been pregnant. He'd refused to listen. Every piece of this disaster traced back to his own choices, his own willingness to believe his mother's lies, his own failure to trust the woman he'd claimed to love. I need to meet them, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I need to know my children. I know you do. That's why I let you in. Deandra sat on her worn sofa, suddenly looking older than her years. But this happens on my terms, at my pace, in ways that protect them from being hurt. You understand? You don't get to storm into their lives and play daddy for a while before disappearing again. Either you're all in, committed for the long term, or you stay away completely. I'm all in. Whatever it takes, whatever you need, I'm there. We'll see. Deandra's expression was skeptical, guarded, built on 3 years of doing everything alone. Tomorrow you can meet them, briefly. We'll tell them you're a friend of mine. Then, if you prove consistent, if you show up when you say you will, if you put their needs first, we'll gradually tell them the truth. But Ben, if you hurt them the way you hurt me, I will take them somewhere you'll never find us. Are we clear? Crystal clear. Ben looked toward the bedroom where his children slept, overwhelmed by how much he'd missed and how much he still had to prove. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this chance. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because they deserve to know their father, and you deserve to know them. What happens after that depends entirely on you. Ben nodded and moved toward the door. I'll come back tomorrow, whatever time works for you. 10 o'clock, don't be late. Deandra's voice was firm, but something in her eyes suggested this was as hard for her as for him. Ben left the apartment and sat in his car for a long time, processing everything. Tomorrow he would meet his children. Tomorrow his life would change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Tomorrow he would begin the long process of earning the right to be called their father. But tonight he had to reckon with the truth of what he'd done and who he'd been. He'd destroyed the woman he loved and driven her away while she carried his children. He'd spent 3 years missing their lives because he'd chosen his mother's poison over Deandra's truth. Some mistakes couldn't be fixed. Some damage was permanent. But if Deandra was willing to give him a chance to know Harry and Rosie, he would take it and hold it like the precious gift it was. He called Patricia from his car. She answered cheerfully, unaware that everything was about to change. Ben, darling, how was Chicago? I'm not coming home yet. I'm staying here for a while. Whatever for? The conference is over. I found out something about Deandra. He paused, gathering courage. She has children, Mother. 3-year-old twins. They're mine. She was pregnant when I threw her out, and I've missed 3 years of their lives. Silence. Then Patricia's voice, carefully controlled. Ben, you can't possibly believe that. She's obviously trying to trap you with someone else's children. You need to demand a paternity test before you commit to anything foolish. I'm going to meet them tomorrow. And yes, we'll do a paternity test eventually. But I've seen them, Mother. They look exactly like me. They're mine, and I'm going to be part of their lives. This is insane. That woman is manipulating you again. Can't you see she's using these children to get access to your money? She didn't tell me about them. I found out on my own. She's been raising them alone for 3 years without asking me for a single dollar. The only person who manipulated anyone is you, when you destroyed my relationship with lies and manufactured evidence. Ben's voice hardened. I'll be in Chicago indefinitely. Don't call me again unless you're ready to admit what you did and apologize. He hung up before she could respond and blocked her number, cutting the cord between Patricia's control and his future. Tomorrow began a new chapter, one where he chose his children over his mother's approval, where he learned to be the father Harry and Rosie deserved. Chapter 6. The Meeting That Changes Everything. Ben arrived at Deandra's apartment at 9:45, unable to wait until the appointed time. He'd spent the night in his hotel room rehearsing what to say, how to act, desperately reading articles about meeting children for the first time. Every article emphasized the same principles. Be calm, let them lead, don't overwhelm them. Remember they're people with feelings and fears. He knocked at exactly 10 o'clock. Deandra opened the door, looking as nervous as he felt. They're having breakfast. I told them a friend of mine was coming to visit. Don't expect too much today. Just a brief introduction. Let them get used to you before we complicate things with the truth. Ben nodded and followed her inside. The apartment looked different in daylight, smaller than he'd thought, filled with evidence of careful budgeting and loving attention. Everything was clean but worn, clearly second-hand, but maintained with care. This was the home Deandra had built with nothing, and it radiated warmth his penthouse had never achieved, with all its luxury. At the small kitchen table sat 2 children eating pancakes. They looked up as Ben entered, and his breath caught. Seeing them from across the street hadn't prepared him for this, for seeing his own features reflected in miniature. The boy, Harry, had his exact eyes, his dark hair with the stubborn cowlick Ben remembered fighting every morning as a child. The girl, Rosie, had his mother's nose, the foster family nose, but with Deandra's warm skin and soft features. Harry, Rosie, this is my friend Ben. Deandra's voice was carefully casual. He's visiting the city and I thought you might like to meet him. Harry stared at Ben with frank curiosity. Are you the one who made Mama cry last week? Deandra's eyes went wide. Ben felt the question like a physical blow. Of course the children had noticed her distress. Of course they'd been aware that something was wrong. That was me, he admitted, deciding honesty was the only path forward. I upset your mama a long time ago, and seeing me reminded her of that. I'm very sorry I made her cry. You should say sorry to her, not to us, Harry said seriously. You're absolutely right. Ben looked at Deandra. I am sorry. For everything. Rosie tugged on Deandra's sleeve. Mama, is he nice? I think so, baby. Why don't we all find out together? Deandra gestured to a chair. Ben, would you like some coffee while the twins finish breakfast? The next hour passed in a strange dream. Ben sat at their small table drinking weak coffee from a chipped mug, while Harry and Rosie asked him questions with the directness of 3-year-olds who hadn't learned to filter curiosity. What did he do for work? Did he have any pets? Had he ever seen a real dinosaur? Could he do a handstand? Ben answered as honestly as possible, trying to connect without overwhelming them. He learned that Harry loved dinosaurs, particularly velociraptors, and could recite facts about Cretaceous period with impressive accuracy for someone who'd only been alive 3 years. Rosie loved drawing flowers and wanted to be an artist when she grew up, or maybe a dancer, or possibly a veterinarian, if that was still an option. They were brilliant and funny, and completely their mother's children in the way they expressed themselves. But they had pieces of him too. Harry's stubborn determination when he insisted on showing Ben his entire dinosaur collection, despite Deandra saying it was time to clean up. Rosie's shy way of watching before deciding to trust, the same caution Ben remembered from his own childhood before Patricia had trained it out of him. "Do you have kids?" Rosie asked suddenly, looking at him with those eyes that were so like his own. It hurt. Ben glanced at Deandra, unsure how to answer. She gave the smallest nod, permission to be truthful within limits. "Not that I knew about until very recently, but I hope to spend time with some special children if they'll let me." "Are we the special children?" Harry asked. "You might be. We'll have to see if we become friends first." Ben smiled at them, his heart so full it physically ached. "What do you think? Would you like to be friends with me?" Both children looked at their mother for guidance. Deandra's expression was complicated, layered with emotions Ben couldn't fully read. Fear and hope and desperate protectiveness all warring across her features. Finally, she nodded. "I think we could try being friends," Harry said seriously. "But you have to be nice to Mama. That's the rule." "That's an excellent rule. I promise I'll be nice to your Mama." "And you can't make her cry again?" Rosie added, her voice firm despite her small size. "I'll do everything I can to make sure that never happens again." The twins seemed satisfied with these promises. They returned to playing, occasionally glancing at Ben to see if he was still there, gradually accepting his presence in their space. Ben watched them with wonder, trying to memorize every detail, every gesture, every expression. After another hour, Deandra suggested it was time for Ben to go. The twins protested mildly, but their attention was already drifting to toys and games. Ben said goodbye, promising to visit again if their mother said it was okay, and let himself out into the hallway. Deandra followed him. "That went better than I expected. They usually take longer to warm up to strangers." "Maybe they recognize something," Ben said quietly. "Maybe some part of them knows. Maybe. Or maybe they're just kids who are naturally friendly when someone is genuinely interested in them." Deandra leaned against her doorframe, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "We need to talk about next steps, about paternity testing, about custody arrangements, about how we're going to tell them the truth eventually. I want to do this right, Deandra. I want to be the father they deserve. But I also want to support you, financially and otherwise. You shouldn't have had to struggle alone for 3 years. I'm not interested in your guilt money." Her voice sharpened defensively. "It's not guilt money, it's child support. It's what any court would order if this became legal." Ben held up his hands. "I'm not threatening you. I'm just saying you shouldn't have to work so hard when I have resources that could make life easier for all 3 of you." Deandra studied his face for a long moment. "We'll talk about money later. Right now, I need to know if you're serious about being consistent. Can you handle visits twice a week? Can you show up when you say you will? Can you put their needs ahead of your schedule?" "Yes. To all of it, yes." "Then come back on Wednesday at the same time. We'll do this gradually. Short visits, supervised by me, building trust before we complicate things with explanations about who you really are." Deandra's expression was guarded but not hostile. Something had shifted during his visit, some small crack in the wall she'd built around herself. "Thank you," Ben said, meaning it with his entire being. "Thank you for this chance. Don't thank me yet. Prove yourself first. Show me you've changed from the man who threw me away." She started to close the door, then paused. "Ben, they're good kids, the best kids. Don't hurt them." "I won't. I swear on everything I have I won't hurt them." The door closed. Ben walked back to his car, feeling lighter than he had in 3 years. He'd met his children. He'd sat at their table, answered their questions, earned their tentative acceptance. It wasn't forgiveness, wasn't reconciliation, but it was a beginning. He drove back to his hotel and immediately began making arrangements to stay in Chicago indefinitely. He called his assistant to have business redirected, meetings rescheduled, his penthouse maintained in his absence. Patricia called twice, but he didn't answer. His mother's opinions no longer mattered. His children's well-being was the only priority. Over the next 2 weeks, Ben established a rhythm. He visited Wednesday and Saturday mornings, spending 2 hours with the twins, while Deandra supervised from the kitchen or living room. Gradually, the children relaxed around him. Harry started asking him to play dinosaurs, complete with elaborate scenarios Ben had to act out. Rosie brought him her drawings to admire and critique with the seriousness of someone presenting art for gallery consideration. Ben learned their routines, their preferences, their personalities. Harry was bold and curious, always pushing boundaries, always testing limits. Rosie was careful and thoughtful, observing before acting, feeling things deeply but expressing them quietly. They fought like all siblings, made up with the speed of childhood forgiveness, and loved each other with uncomplicated devotion. And slowly, agonizingly slowly, Deandra began to soften, not toward him romantically, but toward the possibility of functional co-parenting. She stopped hovering quite so obviously during visits. She asked his opinion occasionally about discipline or activities. She accepted his offer to cover the twins' medical insurance without arguing. Then, at the end of the second week, during a visit where Harry was showing Ben a new book about pterodactyls, Rosie asked the question that changed everything. "Ben, why don't you live with us?" The room went silent. Harry looked up from his book. Deandra froze in the kitchen doorway. Ben met Deandra's eyes across the room, silently asking how to respond. "Because your mama and I aren't married, sweetheart. We're just friends. But you're here all the time, and you're really nice, and you make mama smile sometimes." Rosie's logic was 3-year-old simple. "Don't friends who smile live together?" "Some do, but your mama and I have separate homes. That's okay. Lots of people have friends who don't live with them." "I wish you lived with us," Rosie said wistfully. "Then you could read stories at bedtime." Ben felt his throat close with emotion. "Maybe sometimes I can stay for bedtime stories if your mama says it's okay." He looked at Deandra again. She was crying silently, tears streaming down her face, and he didn't know if it was grief or joy or something in between. She nodded once, granting permission he hadn't expected. That evening, for the first time, Ben stayed through dinner, through bath time, through bedtime routine. He read stories to both children, kissed their foreheads, told them he'd see them in a few days. When he finally left, Deandra walked him to the door. "This is hard," she said quietly. "Watching you with them, seeing how easily they love you, knowing they have no idea who you really are. We need to tell them soon. The longer we wait, the more complicated it becomes." "I agree. Whenever you're ready, we'll tell them together." Deandra nodded. "Next week, we'll sit them down and explain that you're not just my friend, that you're their father, and then we'll deal with whatever comes after." Ben left that evening knowing the hardest conversation was still ahead. The twins had accepted him as their mother's friend. How would they react to learning he was their father who'd been absent their entire lives? Would they understand? Would they feel betrayed? Would the trust he'd built crumble under the weight of truth? Chapter 7. Revelations and Rage. The conversation Deandra had been dreading arrived on a Wednesday morning. She'd spent days preparing how to explain to 3-year-olds that the nice man who visited them wasn't just a friend, that he was their father who hadn't known they existed until recently, that their family was about to change in ways they couldn't yet understand. Ben arrived exactly on time, as he had for every visit over the past month. His consistency had been absolute, showing up when he said he would, leaving when asked, following Deandra's rules without complaint. The twins ran to greet him as they always did now, comfortable with his presence, happy to see him. Harry immediately demanded they play dinosaurs. Rosie wanted to show him a new drawing she'd made of flowers. "Actually, guys, Mama and Ben need to talk to you about something important first." Deandra's voice was steady despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. "Can you both sit on the couch with us?" The twins sensed something serious in her tone and complied without the usual protests. They sat between Deandra and Ben, small bodies pressed against the adults who'd created them, waiting with the patient attentiveness children reserve for moments they know matter. "You know how I've been telling you that your daddy had to go away for work, But that he loves you very much, Deandra began, her throat tight. Both children nodded. Well, I need to tell you the truth now. Your daddy didn't go away for work. He just didn't know about you. He didn't know I was going to have you because Mama left before I could tell him. Why did you leave? Harry asked, direct as always. Because we had a big fight, and I was scared and hurt, and I made a choice to keep you safe the only way I knew how. Deandra's voice wavered. But your daddy found out about you recently, and he's been visiting us because he wants to know you. Rosie looked up at Ben, her face scrunched in confusion. You're our daddy. Yes, sweetheart, I'm your daddy. Ben's voice was rough with emotion. I didn't know you and Harry existed until a few weeks ago, and I'm so sorry I wasn't here for your birthdays and your first steps and everything I missed. But I'm here now, and I want to be your daddy for real if you'll let me. Silence fell over the small living room. The twins looked at each other, having one of those wordless sibling communications that needed no translation. Then Harry spoke. Miss Tammy at daycare has a daddy. He picks her up sometimes and buys her ice cream. Harry's face was serious, considering. If you're our daddy, will you buy us ice cream? Despite the tension, Deandra almost laughed at the 3-year-old logic reducing everything to ice cream economics. Harry, being a daddy is about more than ice cream. But ice cream is important, Harry insisted. Very important, Ben agreed solemnly. And yes, if your mama says it's okay, I will definitely buy you ice cream. But being your daddy means more than that. It means being here when you're sad, helping you when you need it, loving you no matter what happens. Do you love us? Rosie asked, her voice small and uncertain. More than anything in the entire world. I loved you before I even met you, just from knowing you existed. Rosie seemed to consider this carefully. Then she climbed into Ben's lap with the easy trust of a child who'd decided something was settled. Okay, you can be our daddy. Harry nodded agreement and returned to his dinosaur toys, apparently satisfied with the explanation. Children's acceptance was beautiful and terrifying in its simplicity. They'd accepted Ben's presence in their lives with minimal fuss, ready to love him if he proved worthy, willing to trust because their mother was allowing it. But Deandra knew this was just the beginning. The twins were too young to understand the full complexity of what had happened. As they grew older, there would be harder questions. Why didn't you tell him about us sooner? Why did you keep us apart? Did he really want us, or is he just here because he has to be? Those conversations would come, and Deandra would have to answer them honestly, knowing her choices would be judged. After the revelation, life shifted into a new pattern. Ben's visits increased to 4 times a week. He started having the twins overnight at his hotel suite on weekends, returning them Sunday evenings tired but happy. He attended Rosie's dance recital and Harry's preschool dinosaur presentation. He learned their routines so thoroughly that he could execute bedtime without Deandra's guidance. And slowly, agonizingly slowly, something began to heal between Deandra and Ben. Not romantic love that was too damaged to resurrect easily, but a partnership built on their shared love for Harry and Rosie. They communicated daily about the children. They made decisions together. They presented a united front, even when they disagreed privately. Patricia Foster called repeatedly, but Ben never answered. She left voicemails alternating between pleading and accusatory, trying every manipulation technique that had worked in the past. Ben deleted them without listening completely. His mother had lost her power over him the moment he'd held his children for the first time. Then, 6 weeks after Ben had met the twins, Patricia made her move. She hired her own investigator, tracked down Deandra's address, and appeared at the apartment building demanding to meet her grandchildren. The building manager, following Deandra's instructions from when Ben had first shown up, refused her entry and called Deandra immediately. Deandra was at a client meeting when her phone rang. She answered to hear the building manager explaining that an older woman claiming to be the children's grandmother was attempting to gain access to her apartment. I've told her she's not authorized, but she's insisting she has rights. Should I call the police? Yes, call the police and call Ben Foster immediately. His number is on my emergency contact list. Deandra's heart raced as she gathered her things and ran for her car. I'm 10 minutes away. Don't let her near my children." She called Ben while driving, breaking every traffic law to get home faster. "Your mother is at my building trying to force her way to the twins. The manager called the police, but I need you there now." "I'm already on my way. I got a call from the manager too. Don't worry, Deandra. I won't let her near them." Ben's voice was cold, controlled, dangerous in a way she'd never heard before. Deandra arrived to find patrol cars parked outside, lights flashing. Patricia stood on the sidewalk arguing with officers while Ben spoke to them separately, showing documentation on his phone. Deandra ran past them into the building, her only priority reaching Harry and Rosie. The building manager met her in the lobby. "The children are fine. They're with Miss Tammy in your apartment. She's been watching them and they have no idea anything is wrong." Relief weakened Deandra's legs. She climbed the stairs and found the twins playing happily while their elderly neighbor supervised. "Thank you," Deandra breathed. "Thank you so much." "Of course, honey. That woman was frightening, carrying on about her rights and her grandchildren. I'm glad you had instructions in place." After confirming the twins were truly unharmed, Deandra went back downstairs to find Patricia in handcuffs, screaming at Ben about betrayal and ingratitude. Ben stood several feet away, his face carved from stone, speaking to officers in quiet tones. "You're making a terrible mistake," Patricia shrieked at him. "I'm your mother. I have every right to meet my grandchildren. You have zero rights." Ben's voice was ice, absolute and unyielding. "You destroyed my relationship with their mother. You're the reason I missed 3 years of their lives. You think I'm letting you anywhere near them after what you've done?" "I was protecting you from a mistake. Can't you see she was never suitable?" Deandra approached, despite every instinct screaming to stay away. "Mrs. Foster, Ben and I have many problems, and most of them are his fault. But you're the root cause of all of it. You poisoned his mind against me, you manipulated him into destroying our relationship, and you did it because you couldn't stand that he loved someone who didn't meet your prejudice standards. Those children upstairs, they're brilliant and beautiful and perfect, and they will never know you exist." "How dare you speak to me that way?" Patricia hissed. "You trapped my son with those children. You're using them to get access to foster money." "I never told him about them," Deandra said quietly. "He found out on his own. I've raised them alone for 3 years without asking for a single dollar. Everything they have, every comfort they enjoy came from my work and my sacrifice. So don't you dare accuse me of using them for anything." The officers were moving Patricia toward a patrol car. She would be charged with trespassing and potentially harassment depending on what Ben chose to pursue. As they loaded her into the vehicle, she screamed one final warning. "You'll regret this, Ben. You're choosing her over your own family." "No, Mother," Ben called back. "I'm choosing my children over you, and I'll make that choice every single time." The patrol car pulled away. The small crowd that had gathered dispersed. Ben and Deandra stood on the sidewalk, adrenaline slowly fading, processing what had just happened. "I'm getting a restraining order," Ben said. "She's not allowed within 500 feet of you or the twins. If she violates it, she'll be arrested immediately." "Thank you." Deandra's voice shook despite her attempt to stay calm. "Ben, I need you to understand something. If your mother ever gets near my children, if she has any contact with them at all, our arrangement ends. I will take Harry and Rosie somewhere. You'll never find us. I don't care about custody agreements or courts or your rights. I will protect them from her no matter what it costs." "I understand. And I promise you, she'll never get near them. I'll make sure of it legally, and if legal protection fails, I'll handle it personally." Ben's expression was fierce, protective in ways Deandra had never seen from him. "They're my children too. I won't let her poison them the way she poisoned me." Deandra nodded and went back inside, needing to hold her children, needing to confirm they were safe and unaware of the drama unfolding outside. Harry and Rosie barely looked up from their game when she returned, completely oblivious that their grandmother had just been arrested, trying to force her way into their lives. That evening, after the twins were asleep, Deandra sat with Ben in her living room, having the conversation they'd been avoiding. "Your mother is going to keep trying. You know that, right? This won't stop her." "I know, that's why I'm getting a comprehensive restraining order, and I'm doing something else too." Ben pulled out his phone and showed her a document. "I'm removing her from my will entirely. Everything goes to Harry and Rosie, with you as trustee until they're adults. She gets nothing." "Ben, that's extreme." "No, that's appropriate. She stole 3 years from me. 3 years of my children's lives. Every first I missed. Every milestone I wasn't there for. That's her fault. She doesn't deserve to benefit from the foster wealth when she tried to destroy the next generation of fosters." Deandra studied his face, seeing the determination there, the absolute certainty. He'd changed so much from the man who'd destroyed her at that gala, that Ben had been weak, easily manipulated, willing to believe lies because they were easier than standing up to his mother. This Ben was harder, more certain, forged in the fire of regret and the love for children he'd almost lost. "Okay," she said finally, "get the restraining order, change your will, do whatever you need to do to keep them safe. But Ben, understand something. You're doing this for them, not for me. I don't forgive you for what happened 3 years ago. I probably never will, but you're being a good father now, and that matters more than our history. I know I can't fix what I destroyed between us, but I can be the father Harry and Rosie deserve. That's enough. It has to be enough." They sat in silence for a while, two people bound together by love for their children, but separated by a past that couldn't be undone. Finally, Ben stood to leave. "Deandra, thank you for letting me be part of their lives. Thank you for not shutting me out completely when you had every right to. I know I don't deserve this chance, but I'm grateful for it every day. Prove you deserve it by continuing to show up. That's all I ask, just keep showing up. I will. Every day for the rest of my life I will show up for them." Ben left and Deandra locked her door, setting the chain, adding security measures she'd never needed before. Patricia Foster had declared war, and Deandra would do whatever it took to protect her children from that woman's toxic influence. The battle wasn't over, but for now, standing in her small apartment, with her children sleeping safely down the hall, Deandra felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they could build something functional from the ruins of what had been destroyed. Chapter 8. War and Wounds. The restraining order was approved within 72 hours, expedited based on documented evidence of Patricia Foster's attempt to force contact with minor children against parental wishes. Ben received the notification while sitting in Deandra's apartment, watching Harry and Rosie play with blocks, and felt something settle in his chest. Legal protection was in place. His mother couldn't approach them without consequences, but Patricia wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. Over the following weeks, she attempted contact through every channel she could imagine. She called Ben's assistant, claiming family emergency. She sent letters to his hotel marked urgent. She tried to approach him outside the building where he'd temporarily relocated his office operations. Each time, Ben refused engagement, forwarding everything to his lawyer for documentation. Then Patricia tried a different tactic. She reached out to Ben's business associates, spreading carefully worded concerns about his judgment. She suggested he was being manipulated by a woman with financial motives. She implied the children might not be his. She painted herself as a concerned mother watching her son make terrible decisions. Ben's lawyer called to warn him. "She's running a whisper campaign through your professional network. Nothing actionable legally, just spreading doubt and concern. It could impact your business relationships if it continues." "Then we go public with the truth," Ben decided. "I'll release a statement confirming I have children, that their mother and I are co-parenting successfully, and that my mother has been cut out of my life due to her attempts to interfere. Make it clear that anyone listening to her gossip is receiving misinformation from someone with an agenda. That's a nuclear option. It will damage your relationship with your mother permanently." "Good. That relationship died when she tried to force her way to my children. I want everyone to know where I stand." The statement went out through business channels, carefully worded but unambiguous. Ben Foster had children with Deandra Dotin. They were co-parenting cooperatively. Patricia Foster had no involvement in their lives by mutual agreement. Any suggestions otherwise were false and should be disregarded. The response was mixed. Some colleagues congratulated him, others expressed surprise. A few whispered that Patricia might have had a point, that sudden children from an old relationship seemed convenient. But mostly, the statement accomplished its goal. It cut off Patricia's ability to spread doubt without looking spiteful. During this time, Ben's relationship with the twins deepened. He learned Harry's tell for when he was getting tired. He became more stubborn and argumentative. He learned that Rosie needed transition warnings before activities ended, or she would have emotional meltdowns. He learned they both loved being read to, but preferred different stories. Harry wanted adventure and dinosaurs. Rosie wanted fairy tales and happy endings. He also learned how much single parenthood had cost Deandra. She was exhausted constantly, juggling client work with childcare, handling everything from scraped knees to nightmares to the endless questions 3-year-olds generated. Watching her struggle, Ben understood with devastating clarity how hard the 3 years he'd missed had been. "Let me help more," he offered one evening after the twins were asleep. "I can take them more nights during the week. I can hire a nanny to cover gaps in your schedule. I can pay for better childcare so you can focus on work." "I don't need a nanny," Deandra said tiredly. "I need to do this myself. I need to be the one they depend on." "Why? Because you don't trust me to be consistent?" Ben kept his voice gentle, not accusatory. "Because for 3 years, I was all they had. Being their everything is part of my identity now. I don't know how to share that responsibility even when I know I should." Her honesty surprised him. Ben sat beside her on the sofa, careful to maintain distance. "You've done an incredible job with them. They're brilliant and kind and well-adjusted. But you're burning out, Deandra. I can see it. Let me help carry the load, not because you're failing, but because parenting shouldn't be something you do alone when there's another parent willing to help." Deandra looked at him, really looked at him, and Ben saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of 3 years of solo parenting that had carved lines into her young face. "What happens when you get tired of playing daddy? When the novelty wears off and you realize how hard this actually is? I can't let them depend on you if you're going to disappear." "I'm not going anywhere. I've been showing up consistently for 2 months. I've rearranged my entire life around being here for them. What else do I need to do to prove I'm committed?" "I don't know," Deandra admitted. "Maybe nothing. Maybe I'm just waiting for you to fail, because that's easier than trusting you won't." The conversation ended without resolution, but something had shifted. Deandra started accepting more help. She let Ben take the twins overnight twice a week instead of just weekends. She stopped hovering during his visits. She began to lean on him cautiously, testing whether he would hold steady under the weight of shared parenting. And he did. Ben proved consistent in ways that slowly eroded Deandra's defensive walls. He showed up early, never late. He followed through on promises. He learned their routines so thoroughly that he could handle them as competently as she could. Then Patricia made another attempt. She hired an attorney and filed for grandparent visitation rights, arguing that she had a legal claim to relationship with her grandchildren, regardless of Ben's wishes. The motion was weak legally since she'd never had contact with the twins, but it forced Ben and Deandra to hire lawyers and prepare for a court battle. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Deandra said when Ben told her about the filing. "Your mother using the legal system to force her way into their lives. She won't win. Grandparent visitation requires showing existing relationship, and that contact would benefit the children. She's never met them, and we can document her attempt to violate the restraining order. No judge will grant her petition. But we still have to go to court. We still have to put their lives under scrutiny. We still have to prove to strangers that we're making the right choices for our children." Deandra's voice shook with anger and fear. "Do you see now why I didn't tell you about them? This is what I was trying to avoid, legal battles where our children become pawns." Ben wanted to argue, to say she should have trusted him to protect them. But Deandra was right. His mother was proving dangerous in exactly the ways Deandra had feared. "I'll handle this. I'll make sure she loses so definitively that she never tries again." The court date arrived 3 weeks later. Ben and Deandra sat together with their lawyer, presenting a united front. Patricia's attorney argued she had fundamental rights to know her grandchildren, that denying contact was cruel and harmful to family bonds. Ben's attorney presented evidence of Patricia's manipulation, her violation of the restraining order, her attempts to spread malicious gossip about Deandra, her history of toxic behavior that made her unsuitable for contact with vulnerable children. The judge barely deliberated. "Petition denied. Miss Foster, you have no existing relationship with these children, and substantial evidence suggests your presence would be disruptive rather than beneficial. This court will not grant visitation rights to someone who has already violated a restraining order and attempted to force contact against both parents' wishes. You're ordered to cease all attempts to contact Mr. Foster, Ms. Dottin, or the minor children. Further violations will result in contempt charges." Patricia's face twisted with rage as she was led from the courtroom. She pointed at Ben one final time. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life. She's poison, Ben. She'll destroy you and take everything you've built." "You already destroyed it, Mother," Ben said quietly. 3 years ago, when you drove away the only woman I've ever loved and kept me from my children. This is just the consequence of your choices, finally catching up with you." After the hearing, Ben and Deandra stood outside the courthouse in weak sunlight. The victory felt hollow somehow, necessary but painful, like amputating a diseased limb to save the body. "Is it really over?" Deandra asked. "Will she actually stop now?" "If she doesn't, she'll go to jail. Even Patricia isn't that stubborn." But Ben wasn't entirely sure. His mother had surprised him before with the depths she would sink to maintain control. They drove back to Deandra's apartment where Harry and Rosie were being watched by the neighbor. The twins ran to greet them, oblivious to the courtroom drama that had just determined their grandmother would have no place in their lives. "Daddy! Mama, we made cookies!" Rosie held up a slightly burnt cookie with pride. Ben knelt and accepted the cookie like it was the greatest treasure. "This is the best cookie I've ever seen." "Try it," Harry insisted. Ben bit into the cookie that was somehow simultaneously burnt and raw in the middle and smiled like it was delicious. "Perfect. You two are going to be professional bakers." The twins beamed and ran off to play. Deandra watched the interaction with unreadable expression. "You're good with them," she said finally. "Better than I expected you'd be. You're patient and kind and present in ways that matter." "I'm trying. I'm trying to be the father they deserve and the co-parent you need." "I know. And it's working. You're proving yourself every day." Deandra paused, seemed to be deciding something. "I think it's time we formalize custody arrangements. Not because I don't trust you, but because they deserve the security of knowing you're their father legally and permanently." "I agree. Whatever you want to propose, I'll agree to it." They spent the evening drafting an agreement, shared legal custody with Deandra, retaining primary physical custody, Ben having the twins alternate weekends and 2 evenings per week, holidays split fairly, child support set at a reasonable amount that would actually support the children's needs, medical decisions made jointly, educational decisions requiring both parents' approval. It was functional and fair, built on 2 months of proving they could co-parent effectively despite their history. Looking at the agreement, Ben felt something he hadn't felt since the night he'd destroyed them. Hope that they could build something good from the ruins. "Thank you," he said as they finished. "Thank you for giving me this chance to be their father. You've earned it. You've shown up consistently, put them first, protected them from your mother. You've proven you're different from the man who threw me away." Deandra's expression softened slightly. "I'm not saying I forgive you for what happened 3 years ago, but I can work with you now. We can be partners in raising them. That's enough." It wasn't enough for Ben, who still loved her desperately, who wanted to repair everything he'd broken, but it was infinitely more than he deserved, and he'd take it gratefully. Over the following weeks, the new arrangement settled into routine. Ben took the twins every Wednesday evening and alternate weekends. He set up a proper bedroom in his hotel suite for them, filled with toys and books and everything they needed. He learned to cook simple meals they would eat. He mastered bath time and bedtime stories and the delicate negotiation of getting 3-year-olds to brush their teeth. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he and Deandra became friends again. Not romantic partners, not yet, maybe never, but people who could talk about their children, share funny stories, commiserate about parenting challenges, support each other through difficult moments. Ben was learning that love took many forms. His love for Harry and Rosie was uncomplicated and pure, the kind of love that would walk through fire for them. His love for Deandra was more complex, layered with regret and hope, and the understanding that some damage couldn't be fully repaired. But maybe repair wasn't the point. Maybe the point was learning to build something new on the foundation of what had been destroyed, something functional if not perfect, something that served their children's needs, even if it didn't satisfy every adult longing. As Ben tucked Harry and Rosie into bed one evening, listening to their breathing even out into sleep, he understood that this was enough. Being their father, being present, being the person they could depend on, that was enough. Even if he'd lost Deandra forever in the process of finding them. Chapter 9. The Price of the Past. 3 months after the custody arrangement was formalized, Ben Foster sat in his hotel suite reviewing acquisition documents while Harry and Rosie watched cartoons on the sofa. It was a Wednesday evening, his regular night with them, and he'd learned to work around their schedules, to split his attention between business and parenting in ways that somehow accomplished both. His phone rang with an unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. The voice on the other end belonged to an administrator from the building where Patricia lived. "Mr. Foster, I'm calling about your mother. She's been taken to the hospital. She listed you as emergency contact, though we understand you're estranged. We thought you should know." Ben's first instinct was to refuse involvement, to maintain the boundaries he'd established. But the administrator continued. "She collapsed in the lobby. The paramedic said it looked like a stroke. Mr. Foster, she's asking for you. She keeps saying she needs to see her son before she dies." Dies. The word hung in the air. Ben looked at his children, innocent and oblivious, and tried to process his feelings. His mother was dying, and he felt mostly numb. 3 years ago, this news would have devastated him. Now, he felt complicated grief for what might have been if she'd been a different person. Which hospital? After getting the information, Ben called Deandra. "I need to ask a huge favor. My mother had a stroke. She's in the hospital, apparently critical. I don't particularly want to see her, but I feel like I should go. Can you take the twins tonight?" "Of course. Bring them over now. Ben, are you okay?" "I don't know what I am. I'll figure it out." He gathered the children and drove them to Deandra's apartment, explaining that Mama was going to have them tonight because Daddy had an emergency. At the hospital, Ben found Patricia in ICU, hooked to machines that beeped rhythmically. She looked diminished, smaller than he remembered, an old woman instead of the dominating force she'd always been. Her eyes opened when he entered, and something like relief crossed her face. "Ben, you came. They said you were dying. I came to make sure that's actually true." His voice was harsher than he intended, but he couldn't summon false warmth. "Cruel. But I suppose I deserve it." Patricia's voice was weak, slurred from the stroke. "The doctors say I have days at most. Massive cerebral hemorrhage. Nothing they can do." Ben sat in the chair beside her bed, unsure what to feel. This woman had shaped his entire life, for better and worse. Mostly worse, he was realizing. "What do you want from me, Mother? Forgiveness? Absolution?" "I want to apologize." The word surprised him. "For everything. For manipulating you 3 years ago. For driving away Deandra. For keeping you from your children. I was wrong." But even as she said it, Ben heard the careful phrasing, the manipulation embedded in what should have been straightforward apology. She didn't say she was sorry. She said she wanted to apologize, which wasn't the same thing. She said she was wrong, but not about what specifically or how her actions had damaged everyone involved. "You don't mean that," Ben said quietly. "You mean you regret that your actions had consequences you didn't want. You regret that I chose my children over you, but you don't actually believe you were wrong to do what you did." Patricia's expression flickered, caught. "I was trying to protect you." "No, you were trying to control me. There's a difference." Ben leaned forward. "Do you know what your protection cost? 3 years with my children, 3 years of Deandra struggling alone, 3 years of Harry and Rosie growing up without their father. You didn't protect me from anything except happiness. She wasn't right for you. She didn't come from the right family, didn't have the right background. I knew she would hold you back." "There it is." Ben laughed bitterly. "Even now, even dying, you can't let go of your prejudice. You can't admit that Deandra was perfect for me, that she loved me genuinely, that she would have been an incredible partner if you hadn't destroyed us. You're more committed to your classist, racist worldview than to your son's happiness." "Ben, please, I'm dying. Can't we have peace?" "You want peace? Fine. I forgive you for being exactly who you've always been, a controlling, manipulative woman who values social status over human connection. I forgive you for being incapable of loving me enough to want me happy rather than approved of. I forgive you for all of it, not because you deserve forgiveness, but because I need to let go of anger that's poisoning me." Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "I do love you. I always have." "You love the version of me that does what you want. You don't love me, the real me, the man who loves a woman you deem unsuitable, who has children you tried to erase, who prioritizes his family over your approval. That man you don't love at all." "That's not true." "Yes, it is, and I've accepted it. I've accepted that my mother loves her idea of me more than she loves me as I actually am. I've made peace with that. The question is whether you can." Patricia was quiet for a long time, machines beeping steadily, marking time running out. Finally, she spoke again. "Those children, are they really yours?" "Yes, Harry and Rosie are mine. They're brilliant and funny and everything good in the world. And you'll never meet them, never know them, never be part of their lives. That's the price of your choices. Could I see a picture, just once?" Ben pulled out his phone and showed her a recent photo. Harry and Rosie at the park, laughing, covered in grass stains, radiating joy. Patricia stared at the image for a long time. "They look like you did as a child." Her voice held something that might have been regret or might have been grief. "They're beautiful." "They are, and they're loved completely by both their parents. We're building a family together, Deandra and I, for their sake. It's not the family you would have chosen for me, but it's the one that matters." Ben stood to leave. Patricia's hand shot out, surprisingly strong for someone dying, catching his wrist. "Ben, wait. I need to tell you something. About Deandra contacting me after she left." Ben's heart stopped. "What?" "She tried to reach you through me. She sent messages, emails, tried calling. She said she needed to tell you something important about your future. I intercepted everything. I told her you never wanted to hear from her again, that you'd moved on, that contact would result in legal action. I made sure she believed you wanted nothing to do with her." The revelation hit Ben like a physical blow. Deandra had tried. She'd tried to tell him about the pregnancy, and Patricia had blocked her. Every piece of this disaster traced back to his mother's interference, deeper and more comprehensive than he'd even realized. "You kept her from telling me about my children." His voice was flat, dangerous. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought she was trying to trap you." "No. You thought you were maintaining control. You thought you could erase her completely and find me someone suitable. You thought you could rewrite my life according to your preferences." Ben pulled his wrist from her grip. "I hope you're proud of what you accomplished. You got exactly what you wanted. Me without Deandra. And all it cost was your relationship with your son and grandchildren. Ben, please don't leave like this. Don't let the last words between us be angry. These aren't the last words. The last words were 3 months ago, when I told you to stay away from my family. These are just the final confirmation that I made the right choice. Ben moved toward the door, then paused. I hope you find peace, Mother. I genuinely do. But you won't find it with me. Goodbye. He left the hospital and sat in his car for a long time, processing everything. Patricia had intercepted Deandra's attempts to contact him. Deandra had tried to do the right thing, and his mother had blocked her at every turn. The narrative he'd constructed about Deandra choosing to keep the twins secret crumbled under the weight of this new information. Ben drove to Deandra's apartment. It was late, past the twins' bedtime, but he needed to tell her what he'd learned. She answered the door in pajamas, concern on her face. Is your mother okay? She's dying, and she told me something you need to know. Ben explained about the intercepted messages, about Patricia blocking Deandra's attempts to contact him. I'm so sorry. You tried to tell me, and she kept that from both of us. Deandra's face went through several expressions: vindication, rage, grief. I knew it. I knew you couldn't have just ignored me completely. I sent 6 emails, called a dozen times, left messages with her office, and she told me you'd said to stop contacting you, or you'd get a restraining order. I never said that. I never even knew you were trying to reach me. Ben felt tears burning his eyes. Deandra, I'm so sorry, for all of it, for believing her lies 3 years ago, for not finding you sooner, for every moment of pain you went through because I was too weak to stand up to her. It doesn't change what happened. It doesn't give us back those 3 years. But Deandra's voice was softer than he'd heard it in months. But it helps. It helps knowing you didn't ignore me deliberately. It helps understanding that you were being manipulated until the very end. They stood in her doorway, 3 years of misunderstanding and manipulation finally exposed. Ben wanted to pull her into his arms, to hold her, to try to rebuild what they'd lost. But he'd learned patience. He'd learned that healing took time, that trust rebuilt slowly, that some damage couldn't be fixed overnight. Thank you for telling me, Deandra said finally. It matters. It doesn't fix everything, but it matters. I should go. It's late, and the twins are probably asleep. Ben, for what it's worth, I'm sorry about your mother. Even after everything, losing a parent is hard. He nodded and left, carrying the weight of revelation and loss. Patricia would die soon, taking with her all the potential for what might have been if she'd chosen love over control, and Ben would have to find a way to grieve for the mother who'd never really existed, the one who could have been supportive and loving but chose manipulation instead. 2 days later, Patricia Foster passed away quietly in her hospital bed. Ben arranged a small funeral, inviting only her few remaining friends. Deandra offered to come for support, but he declined. This was something he needed to do alone, to bury not just his mother, but the version of himself that had let her control him. At the funeral, looking at the casket that held the woman who'd shaped so much of his life, Ben felt mostly relief. Relief that she couldn't hurt his children. Relief that her manipulation had finally ended. Relief that he could build a future without her poison infecting it. And underneath the relief, a small seed of grief for the relationship they'd never had. The mother-son bond that could have been beautiful, but instead became toxic. After the funeral, Ben returned to Deandra's apartment and held his children close, breathing in their innocence, promising himself he would never let anyone poison their love the way Patricia had poisoned his. Chapter 10. Falls to his knees. The weeks after Patricia's death brought unexpected clarity. With his mother's influence finally, permanently removed, Ben found himself re-evaluating everything about his life. The penthouse that had felt like an achievement now felt empty. The business empire that had consumed him felt hollow. The only things that mattered were 3 people living in a small apartment across the city. He'd been spending more time there lately, not just for scheduled visits, but casual drop-ins that Deandra had started allowing. He'd help with dinner, stay for bath time, read bedtime stories more often than not. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, he'd become part of their daily routine rather than a scheduled visitor. One Saturday morning, Ben arrived to take the twins to the park. Harry and Rosie ran to greet him as always, but Deandra remained in the kitchen, her expression troubled. "Can we talk after you get back? There's something I need to discuss with you." Ben's stomach dropped. Those words never led anywhere good. "Of course. Everything okay? We'll talk later. Take the twins. Enjoy the park. They've been looking forward to it all week." The park visit was wonderful as always. Harry had mastered the monkey bars and insisted on demonstrating repeatedly. Rosie made friends with another little girl, and they played an elaborate game involving unicorns and dragons. Ben pushed swings, wiped scraped knees, bought ice cream from a vendor. "Daddy, why don't you live with us?" Harry asked suddenly, licking chocolate ice cream from his fingers. The question came up periodically, and Ben never had a good answer. "Because Mama and I have separate homes, buddy. That's how lots of families work. But it would be better if you lived with us. Then you'd be there for breakfast and bedtime stories every day." Harry's logic was simple and devastating. "I know, sweetheart, but sometimes grown-ups need their own spaces." "That's stupid," Harry declared. "You should live with us." Rosie nodded agreement. "You're our daddy. Daddies should live with their kids." Ben had no response that would satisfy them. He'd thought about it constantly, about finding a place near Deandra's apartment, about asking if she'd consider moving into something bigger that they could share platonically, about a dozen scenarios that would put him closer to his children without crossing boundaries Deandra had established. They returned to the apartment, and Ben sent the twins to wash up while he found Deandra in the kitchen. She looked nervous, which was unusual. Deandra had developed armor over 3 years of single parenting, and seeing it crack made Ben anxious. "What did you want to talk about?" "I got a job offer, a really good offer. It's a consulting firm in Boston, and they want me to head their financial analysis division. It's triple what I make freelancing, with benefits and security and everything we need." Deandra's words came fast, like she was bracing for his reaction. "Boston?" Ben felt the word drop into his stomach like a stone. "You're moving to Boston?" "I haven't decided yet, but, Ben, this is the kind of opportunity I can't turn down lightly. It would change everything for us, for the twins' future. They could go to better schools. We could live in a better neighborhood. I could stop worrying about money constantly." "What about me? What about my time with them?" "That's why I wanted to talk to you first, before I make any decisions. We have a custody arrangement, and I won't violate it. But I need to know if you're willing to work with me on this. Long-distance parenting, maybe them flying back here for visits, or you coming to Boston regularly." Ben sat down hard on a kitchen chair. Boston, hundreds of miles away. His children growing up in another city, their daily lives happening without him. Weekend visits instead of Wednesday evenings. Missing school plays and soccer games and all the small moments that made up childhood. "I can't do long-distance parenting. I can't see them every other month and pretend that's enough." His voice came out rougher than intended. "I know. That's why I haven't accepted yet. I'm trying to figure out what works for everyone." Deandra sat across from him. "Ben, I need this opportunity. I need the financial security, the career advancement, the chance to provide better for them. But I also know you've been an amazing father these past few months. I don't want to take that away from you or them." "Then don't go. Stay here. I'll support you financially, cover whatever you need. You don't have to uproot their entire lives." "I don't want your support. I want to earn my own success, build my own career. I've been dependent on nothing and no one for 3 years, and I'm not going to start now just because it's convenient." They stared at each other across the small kitchen table, the same fundamental disconnect that had always existed between them. Ben wanted to fix everything with money and resources. Deandra wanted to fix everything with her own capability and strength. What if I moved to Boston too? The words escaped before Ben fully thought them through. Deandra blinked. What? What if we both moved? You take the job, I relocate my operations, we maintain the custody arrangement in a new city. The twins don't have to choose between parents, and you get your career opportunity. You can't just relocate your entire company because I got a job offer. That's insane. Why is it insane? Most of what I do can be done remotely. The few things that require in-person attention I can handle with travel. We could find a place, separate apartments in the same building maybe, where the twins could move between us easily. They'd have both parents. You'd have your career. I'd still be part of their daily lives. Deandra studied his face, searching for something. You'd really do that? Uproot your entire life to follow me to Boston? I'd do it for them. I'd do it to be part of their lives in meaningful ways instead of phone calls and occasional visits. I'd do it because being their father matters more than where my office is located. This isn't about us, Deandra said firmly. This wouldn't be us getting back together or trying to rebuild our relationship. This would be co-parenting logistics. I know. I'm not asking for anything except the chance to stay involved in their lives. But Ben's heart was asking for everything, asking for the impossible, asking for the family they could have been. Let me think about it. I have a week before I need to give the firm an answer. Deandra stood, signaling the conversation was over. Don't say anything to the twins yet. I don't want them getting excited or worried before we know what's happening. Ben agreed and left, his mind spinning with possibilities. Boston, a new city, a fresh start, the chance to be part of his children's daily lives instead of just scheduled visits. The opportunity to prove he was all in, committed beyond convenience, willing to sacrifice anything for them. Over the next week, Ben researched Boston obsessively. He found office space he could lease. He looked at apartments near Deandra's potential new job. He mapped out schools and parks and everything the twins would need. He built an entire life in his imagination, a life centered around being present for Harry and Rosie. On the 7th day, Deandra called and asked him to come over after the twins were asleep. When he arrived, she looked exhausted but determined. I'm taking the job, and if you're serious about relocating, we'll figure out how to make that work. But Ben, I need you to understand something. This isn't about us. This is about being good parents. You're doing this for Harry and Rosie, not to win me back. I know. But I need you to understand I'm doing this for them, not as some strategy to win you back. Ben met her eyes directly. Whatever happens between us is separate from being their father. Deandra nodded slowly. Okay, then let's do this. Let's move to Boston and figure out how to make co-parenting work in a new city. The move happened quickly. Within 6 weeks, Deandra had relocated for her new position. Ben followed 2 weeks later, having arranged temporary office space and found an apartment 3 blocks from hers. The twins adjusted surprisingly well, excited about their new neighborhood, their new preschool, the adventure of a different city. Ben established a routine of picking them up from preschool twice a week and having them overnight on weekends. He learned the new parks, the best ice cream shops, the library with the good children's section. He became a fixture in their Boston life, just as he'd been in Chicago. 4 months into their new arrangement, on a crisp autumn morning, Ben took the twins to a park near Deandra's apartment. Harry had been begging to show him something special, refusing to explain what it was. When they arrived, Ben understood. Harry had learned to ride a bike, and he'd been practicing with Deandra in secret. "Watch, Daddy!" Harry took off on his small bike, pedaling furiously, Rosie cheering from the sidelines. Ben watched his son ride in circles, pride swelling so intensely it hurt. This was what he'd been missing for 3 years, these moments of pure childhood triumph. He'd almost missed this too, almost let distance separate him from these experiences. "Did you see? Did you see?" Harry skidded to a stop, breathless and grinning. "I saw. That was incredible, buddy." Ben scooped him up, bike and all, spinning him around. Rosie tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, I have something to show you too." She led him to a park bench where she'd hidden a drawing. It showed 4 stick figures in front of a house, all of them holding hands. Above it, in her careful 3-year-old letters, "Our family." Ben's throat closed. He knelt down to her level. "This is beautiful, sweetheart. Who are these people?" "That's you and Mama and me and Harry. We're a family." She said it with such certainty, such simple faith. "We are a family," Ben confirmed. "A very special family. But we don't all live together. Why not?" Rosie's question was innocent, but it cut straight to the heart of everything complicated between him and Deandra. "Because sometimes families live in different houses. That's okay. It doesn't make us less of a family." "But I want us all together," Rosie said, her eyes filling with tears. "I want you to live with us, like Miss Emma's daddy lives with her." Ben pulled her close, feeling her small body shake with tears she didn't fully understand. Harry abandoned his bike and joined them, wrapping his arms around both of them. And in that moment, kneeling on the grass with his children clinging to him, Ben understood what he needed to do. He needed to stop being afraid, stop protecting himself from potential rejection, stop accepting half measures when his children deserved everything. That evening, after returning the twins to Deandra, Ben asked if they could talk. They sat in her small living room while the children played in their bedroom. "The twins asked again why we don't all live together," Ben started. "They ask me that constantly. I tell them the same thing you probably do, that families come in different forms." Deandra's expression was guarded. What if we stopped giving them that answer? What if we actually became the family they're asking for? Deandra stared at him. "Ben, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you. I never stopped loving you. I know I destroyed us 3 years ago. I know I don't deserve a second chance. But I'm asking for one anyway, not because I've earned it, but because I can't keep pretending I don't want us to be a real family. This is about the kids asking questions. You're feeling guilty because they want something we can't give them. No. This is about me finally being brave enough to tell you the truth. I love you, Deandra. I love who you are now, who you've always been, who you've become through everything you've survived. I love your strength and your fierceness and the way you protect our children. I love how you've given me chances I don't deserve and held me accountable when I've failed. I love everything about you, and I can't keep pretending I don't." Deandra's eyes filled with tears. "You hurt me so badly. You destroyed me, Ben. I don't know if I can trust you with my heart again. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I'm asking you to forgive me anyway. I'm asking you to give me the chance to spend the rest of my life proving I've changed, proving I choose you, proving I'll fight for us instead of running when things get hard. What if you hurt me again? What if your words are pretty now, but you revert to the man who believed lies over truth? Then you leave, and I live with the consequences. But Deandra, I've spent 4 months proving I'm different. I moved to a new city for our children. I've shown up consistently. I've put you and them first in every decision. At some point, you have to decide whether I've proven myself enough to risk trusting me." Deandra was quiet for a long time, tears streaming silently down her face. Ben waited, heart pounding, knowing everything hinged on this moment. "I don't forgive you," she said finally. "Not completely, not yet. What you did 3 years ago still hurts. But I can see you've changed. I can see you're trying. And maybe that's enough to start with." Start what? Start trying. Start seeing if we can be more than co-parents. Start building something new that honors what we lost while creating something better. Deandra wiped her eyes. "But Ben, if you hurt me again, if you prove this is just guilt or obligation, we're done. Not just romantically. You'll be the father who sees his kids according to a court schedule and nothing more. Understood?" "Understood. I won't hurt you again. I swear on our children's lives, I won't hurt you again." Deandra stood and walked to where Ben sat. She looked down at him for a long moment, then held out her hand. Ben took it, stood, and pulled her gently into his arms. She resisted briefly, then melted against him, and for the first time in 3 years, they held each other without anger or fear between them. "This is terrifying," she whispered against his chest. "I know, but we'll figure it out together." They stood like that for a long time, two people who'd destroyed and rebuilt each other, learning to trust again, learning to hope again. From the bedroom, they heard Rosie call out, "Mama, Daddy, can you both come tuck us in?" Ben and Deandra pulled apart, looked at each other and smiled. Together, they walked to their children's room and tucked them in, reading stories side by side, kissing foreheads, whispering goodnight. As they left the room, Harry called out one more time, "Are you staying tonight, Daddy?" Ben looked at Deandra. She nodded permission. "Yeah, buddy, I'm staying tonight." And in the morning, when Harry and Rosie woke to find both parents making breakfast together, when they saw their family finally assembled the way they'd been drawing it for months, the joy on their faces made every moment of pain worthwhile. Ben had fallen to his knees in that park months ago, surrendering pride and control. Now he was rising again, not alone, but lifted by the love of the family he'd almost destroyed and had been given the grace to rebuild.